And then I was just talking about that. I don't want to share this house. So, for the people that feel doors, but my dad did about shaking my dad. So they're next door to us. And then across the now from us. My bars are on the chairman. So he's across the street. So it's always easy to go. And then we made friends at the beach and but half of those houses, they got a real problem. It is, it's the furthest thing from
Yes, I am. We did some volunteer work with the water festival. I think it was maybe the year before.
Okay.
My son came ready to get his healing, so we're kind of a sad but happy kind of place. Because it was just the greatest Boy Scout troop. They were so active.
Call this meeting in order of the Monday, January 23rd, meeting of the Planning and Land Development Regulation Commission. My name is Stacy Eckert. I am currently serving as chair of the commission. We'll do a roll call real quick. I'm here. Alan Cook.
Here.
Anna Aziza.
Here.
Teresa Lane.
Here.
Robert Feather.
Here.
And Earl Farmer.
Here.
You got a full house. Are there any additions, deletions, or modifications of the proposed agenda? Take that as a no. And we have time set aside for public comments. There's a lot of folks here. There's two levels of public comment. One is for items that are not on the agenda, and one is for items that are on the agenda. So the agendas here, the agenda mostly tonight is a mandatory change to the land development code, and the other one is a proposed amendment to the comprehensive plan. I see a lot of votes, but I only have 3 cards filled out, so if you would like to participate by commenting, please make your way up to the front and fill out the comment card. The blue is for an agenda item, and the yellow is for non-agenda items. I have two yellow cards that I believe are probably agenda items. That is, I'll just check. Carrie Marshall for proposed change to the Lake Helen Comprehensive Plan. I assume that is an agenda item.
Yes, sir.
And then,
Fill out a blue card, sir?
that's fine. No, we'll do that. And Tim Taylor?
Yeah.
Same thing? Okay. And if you wish to make comments, please just fill out a card and we got your name written down. Are there any, is there anyone who would like to make a public comment on an item that is not on the agenda? Okay, good. We have minutes from the last time we met. Is it that long ago? June of 2022?
We thought we were retired,
That's a period of time. Does anyone have any changes that they proposed to the minutes that were from the minutes meeting? If not, is there a motion to approve the previous meeting minutes?
I made a motion to approve the previous minutes.
Second, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? None. So the business of the commission tonight is a public hearing on 2 ordinances. Public hearing on ordinance number 2023-01. That is the first ordinance of the year, I guess. 2023-01, ordinance that will amend the city's comprehensive plan as mandated by an amendment to the Florida Constitution. Public hearing must be held, but all local ordinance have no choice but to adopt the wording proposed. So, Lee, you had some.
Just a few brief words, because quite frankly, you don't have any choice. The Florida Constitution was amended by the voters of the state, requiring that the Section 10 that's outlined in the ordinance be included in everybody's comprehensive plan, all 467 cities and 67 counties. So we have to adopt that before we can make any other change to a comprehensive plan that's proposed. Again, we have no choice, but we must hold a public hearing, and that's the purpose of the first item on the agenda.
Mr. Chairman, I move we approve.
I have a motion to approve the ordinance, the mandatory ordinance from Robert Feather. A second on that? Anna? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? None? Approved. So the next item on the agenda is a proposed public, we have a public hearing on ordinance number 2023-02. So the second ordinance of 2023. This is, according to the agenda, we got ordinance 2023-2 is an ordinance submitted by the property owner of the areas formerly known as the Auto Mall. It's just a signifier, and also known as Orange Camp Point Center Project. Current land use map and zoning are both employment center and do not allow residential uses. The ordinance amends the city's comprehensive plan to allow 300 apartments and 152 townhomes on the property as part of the citizens' vision for the city of Lake Helen in the year 2035. There's a staff report which we'll discuss, emanating from a review of the project, and I believe there's also a financial analysis prepared by an accountant that says what would be the financial ramifications of such change or such ordinance. The ordinance, should I read this out or is it up above?
The title? I don't know, it's not necessary to read the title at this board level. That's why it has to be read by title for adoption.
So, sir?
Well, maybe if I can give an intro.
Okay.
To kind of help you bring us where we are, how we kind of got here where we are. This property, can you hear that one that has that map on it? Okay, there's a map right there. And the EC, from a historical perspective, the EC is originally was that green triangular area with the water in the middle, that area, and then a little bit of red down here towards the bottom, right there. Yep. When the city adopted its comprehensive plan, that was the original EC. That's the employment center. That area is, except the red area, the little triangle area, the green area is my understanding that is part of the Victoria Park DRI, and pursuant to the DRI, that area has to be developed commercial. So, one influenced the other. I don't know if the comprehensive plan, this all happened before I started representing the city. I don't know if the comprehensive plan influenced the DRI or the DRI influenced the comprehensive plan, but that's the area, the green area, when the EC was put there, the employment center land use was put on the property. That's the property that was analyzed and talked about, the green area and that little bit of red area. And then I think 2018-ish, somewhere in that time frame, the property owner proposed to the area, the bigger area to the red that kind of goes to the left, wanted to do the auto mall. And they annexed into the city that red area. And before that, that was the unincorporated area of the county. So they petitioned to annex in that red area, and they asked, at the time they were going to do auto malls, the auto dealerships, and that was consistent with employment center, that was commercial, employment center allows commercial. So the city was easy expansion of our employment center land use to incorporate that area that was originally, when our comp plan was originally, that was the unincorporated area of the city. And then we did the ultimately rezoning that went into a plan development, a development agreement, a site plan that allowed the auto mall development. I think this little point is important because I don't want y'all to think that all this property that we're talking about was analyzed and considered from a planning, long-term planning perspective to be commercial, and that this is proposing a change to it. Because really what the city looked at when they analyzed it was that green triangular piece and that little red piece. That's what was analyzed and looked at from a long-term planning perspective to make it commercial. The area we're talking about is the red area. So you got that little triangular piece, but the vast majority of that red area was not in the city. It was in the county, or was in the unincorporated area of the county. And it got the EC land use because the proposed development was commercial, an auto mall. Well, COVID hit, and that had an impact on all commercial activity on our economy, including auto industry, and I think we're still seeing impacts on commercial employment center type use, commercial businesses, commercial office space, those type of things have been impacted. So the property owner came and said, I would like to be able to offer residential there. And we said, well, can't do that. So what do we need to do to allow a residential use there? Now what's important is, what's being proposed is to add residential. We're not taking anything away. So the commercial uses are still a possibility. It's adding residential to that mix. We're not eliminating the possibility that there could be commercial. We're just expanding the type. What's being proposed is an expansion of the uses that would be available. So there's really a three-step process, and my intent of this is to kind of, one, give you a history of how we got here briefly, and then outline, let you know what we've outlined as our steps, assuming the commission moves forward. How will this play out, and what are the steps to ultimately get to where this project would be approved, and then make sure you all understand what step we are at tonight. So how tonight fits in the whole picture. So the steps are, first, we need to amend our employment center land use to allow residential. That's step one. We have to allow that because we cannot approve any development that's inconsistent with our comprehensive plan. Right now, our comprehensive plan does not clearly allow, I don't think it allows at all, but any residential. So we need to make it clear that residential is an allowed land use. That's step one. Step two is we have to amend a land development regulation to allow this type of residential development. We have to amend a current zoning category or create a new one or the other, that would allow this type of residential developments being contemplated. And then the last step is actually rezoning the property to the new residential development. Residential regulated plan unit development, land development zoning code provision. So what we outlined for us is, this is what's called a transmittal hearing, ultimately for the commission. Some types of comp plans can be what's called small scale amendments, can be approved rather quickly, but this type of text amendment has to go through a hearing where you have transmittal. And it's called the transmittal hearing. After if it's approved, it gets sent to various agencies for review and comment. That takes a little while. So our thought is, if approved at transmittal hearing, while we're waiting for the comment to come back from these agencies, we will work on the land development regulation to create the zoning category, whether a new one or amended existing one, that will accommodate the use and come up with a rezoning ordinance. We'll have an attached development agreement, a preliminary site plan, which you typically see with a PUD. The goal would be to bring those back to this body for review and recommendation. Then they would go to the city commission for first reading. Then we would wait until we have our comments back on our transmittal to the agencies on this particular document before tonight. And then we would finalize that based on the comments. And then all three would go to the city commission for second reading. First thing we would adopt is the item you're considering tonight is, do we amend our land use? If that passes, we go on to amending our land development regulations to create a zoning category that would accommodate the project. And then if that's approved, then we rezone, go to the rezoning ordinance and rezone it to that new land development regulation. And there will be staggered effective dates because they have to be they can't all take effect at the same time. They have to be dominoed because our comprehensive plan change. This one, even after adoption, second reading, doesn't take effect immediately. It still has to go back to the state in a period of time for objection. So there's a domino effect of when these can take effect. Or domino. So, but the intent is, and then ultimately it goes to the commission for second reading and approval. If it gets that way. I'm not saying it will, but I'm saying, assuming there's yeses to this process. The commission will have everything before it at the second reading. Everything they need to approve before that, for this project at one meeting, and they'll consider all three of those things. So that's the goal. That's how we kind of structured it if we have going through the approval process. Where we are at tonight is step one. We got to amend the comprehensive plan to allow residential as requested. This is, you've probably heard discussed with this body, you've heard things about quasi-judicial hearings. This isn't a quasi-judicial hearing. This is a legislative action. This is policy setting. So you're not held to the higher standards of your action has to be supported by competent and substantial evidence. The review here is policy and legislative setting. It's, as long as you don't abuse your discretion. So there's a lot of discretion to this body and the commission on approving policy changes on how they want to see the growth in this area. And that's and really the question is, do we want to allow residential in this part of the EC? And that's very important. What's been asked is it would only be the red area of the employment center for residential. Residential would not be allowed anywhere else other than the red area. The remainder, because it's subject to the restriction in the proposal, is anything subject to the Victoria Park DRI would not have residential. And it's also setting a specific number of residential units, as opposed to so many units per acre within the entire EC. There's a certain number of units that they've asked for, and per their concepts, they would probably use all those up. So there would be no more if that occurred, there would be no more residential to put to the north. And even if we wanted to put residential to the north, yes, we could always amend our comp plan and our regulations to do that, but because it's controlled by the Victoria Park DRI, we don't have exclusive say over that. We would have to go through the process of amending the DRI, which would require the approval, I believe, of everybody who signed on the original DRI, which would include, I assume, the land, the county, probably state agencies, maybe Department of Environmental Protection. So it's not putting residential in the green area on that map is possible, but very difficult. Not as easy as it is as putting residential in the red area, because we have exclusive say over that. Whereas the rest of it, even if we wanted to, other people have to bless that as well. The other thing I think is important, you may see renditions, you may have already received renditions. You're not approving a development tonight. The rendition is a concept of what they're looking at, but don't put too much weight into that rendition, because you're not approving the rendition. That could possibly be built, but they're not required to build it to that rendition. It's a rendition that will allow, based on the number of residential units, it could be built. But all that's going to come forward, remember I talked about creating the land development regulation and then rezoning it with a development agreement and a PUD, development agreement, site plan. That's when you're approving the development. What you're approving here, what you're being asked to approve here tonight or recommend for approval, is the concept of allowing residential in this area of the EC only. That's really the concept, the question before you. And there's 3 decisions you can make. Obviously, you could support the request, make a recommendation to approve the request. You can also make a recommendation to deny the request. And there's also, you may say, some residential there might be okay, just not what they asked for. Maybe it could be less residential, or maybe you would want to see a mixture of residential and commercial. You don't want to you want to require at least some commercial on this property, but allowing some residential would be okay. This is a planning recommendation. There's a lot more freedom here with the planning aspect of it, as opposed to when somebody comes in with a specific rezoning with a development plan. They don't have much discretion here. Like I said, there is the discretion to work within the parameters of a yes and a no. There may be something in between that this body feels comfortable recommending. So we have those kind of options available to you. Trying to see, I just made some notes, see if there's anything else I need to go over. I think that covers just about everything I want to touch on. Does anybody have any questions?
Scott, I have a question. Okay. As I understand it, from my experience with comp plans and so forth, going through the years, my understanding is when we did the comp plan, I didn't do it, but whoever did it, when we put a comp plan like that, I had gone through it in this town with a certain situation I was in, and I was told that if I was to change to put what I wanted to put in, and these people wanted to put in, I would have to change the comp plan. And they said you could not change things, and else you change the comp plan. Is that true?
That you cannot change things?
In other words, whatever we got into the comp plan right now, ABC, whatever it might be. Okay, if we want to change one of those things that's not conforming to the comp plan, we would have to change that part or one of the parts of the comp plan to make that change, to be legal. Is that true?
Let me answer it. I'm not 100% sure I understand your question, but let me try to give you an answer. Your comp plan is required by state law, and it is some people refer to it as like the constitution for development within your jurisdiction. So you're going to have broad provisions typically in your comprehensive plan that control, I think they're objectives and policies and things like that. When you read it, you're going to say, wow, that's not very specific usually. But they're goals that they have in your comp plan. Those goals then get implemented through your land development regulations. That's typically where you see your specificity come in. So if somebody wants to change the zoning, this particular property is a good example. They say, we want to put residential on this property. And we say, well, you can't do it with the EC zoning, with your current zoning. We're going to have to rezone your property to something different, to what you want. And we say, okay, you would have to go to this zoning, or we have to create a zoning. Let's look at the land use, because we can't change the zoning if it's not consistent with the land use, the comp plan. So we had to go back and look at our comp plan, and to accommodate the request, we need to change the comp plan, because the comp plan doesn't allow residential. Now, if the comp plan allowed residential, and it allowed the number of units that they were seeking, then we wouldn't be here talking about a comp plan. We would just be here dealing with the land development regulations and possibly just a rezoning issue. But in this particular case, you know, the employment center land use does not provide for residential. Other than there's a reference to supporting uses or something like that, but when you look at the comp plan as a whole, it doesn't refer to residential being over. It actually talks about residential not being there. So I think when you look at everything together, I think without supporting uses being defined more clearly, which is what is being proposed, let's clearly say supporting uses could be residential. I wasn't comfortable making that broad of an interpretation of what supporting uses were, given the other language, the verbiage, and the comp plan. So if we were just doing a rezoning, if your comprehensive plan was good, and there was a zoning category, we didn't have to amend our land development regulations at all, and we were just rezoning the property to allow what the comp plan allows, we would be having a quasi-judicial hearing right now. We would not be having a legislative hearing. The comp plan is legislative. Amending our land development regulations is legislative. Those are policy-setting issues. Once you put the policies in place that allow what the individual wants, now you're not policy setting anymore when you apply those regulations to an applicant. You're now in a quasi-judicial setting, and your decisions have to be supported by substantial competent evidence, for or against. So it's a step process, Cookie. You gotta. Do we have to make policy changes to allow the development, or don't we? We don't. It's just a quasi-judicial hearing to allow. But so I'm not sure what you were told, what you're referring to. But I can just make it an example of this particular case. What they were asking for was not allowed in the comp plan, so we have to amend the comp plan. And that is a legislative policy.
And reading the comp plan and stuff, that one of the biggest things in the comp plan that hits you in the face is density. That's the big thing on our comp plan as far as density. Now, as far as I'm concerned, doing what we're about to do, or whatever we're going to do here, is density has a lot to do with this, because you're taking it out of a commercial piece of property and put it into a possibility of having apartments and stuff. To me, okay, I'm just using my figure, that's the biggest thing. With density, if you weren't changing the density as much with this item, it wouldn't bother me as much. But reading that comp plan, everything is density, density, density. And as far as I'm concerned, what we're planning on doing, or maybe doing, or whatever it might happen, density is the biggest thing. And when you start putting a bunch of people, 1,000 people in apartments, you know what I mean, compared to a commercial piece of property, that's a big difference to me. Okay, so
Yeah, it is a difference because,
all right,
and typically when you talk about density, what you see is units per acre. How many units per acre are someone allowed to build? In this particular one, they're saying they're giving a specific number of units, not units per acre, because we have EC that goes in areas we don't want this to be built in. And, you know, when this came up, we talked about the idea of creating a new land use or going to an existing residential land use. The problem was we did not want this type of development coming on this side of I-4.
on this side.
This side of I-4. You know,
Okay.
it's pretty clear talking to people. I wasn't here when all this was done.
Yes.
But that area where the auto mall was planned and the property to the north, that was kind of envisioned always to be your high-intensity uses. And we have the I-4 as a buffer between those high-intensity uses and the rest of Lake Helen. Just generally, that's what I've kind of heard from people. And I agree, we do not allow in our city the type of residential density. I don't believe that's being contemplated on this project. I don't think we allow that anywhere. So that's why we're having, but the unique thing about this, and I'm not arguing for or against, but the unique thing is you have the I-4 buffer between us. It's separated from the remaining part of the city. In terms of, when you think of commercial, residential, you talk about density. When you talk about commercial, you talk about intensity. It's like density is residential, intensity is the commercial side. What was proposed, what can currently be built right there? You know, they're vested to build the automobile. So you always got to remember, you're not looking at vacant land versus what they want to build. You compare, what can they build under current regulations in terms of the use to what they want to do. And the existing entitlements that are on that property are pretty intense. I mean, you go back and you can look at that auto mall use, that was a pretty intense development for that property. So there was a lot of impacts that were going to be caused to the road, the infrastructures, the utilities. There were going to be impacts with what has already been approved. So whenever you look at a development, you never look at it from vacant land to what they're asking for. You look at it from what are they allowed to do now compared to what they're asking to do. So, but all those intensities, those still have to be, just because you say residential, say this goes through and it's approved. Yes, you can have this many residential units. But whether or not you can actually get that many residential units, you still have to go through the concurrency evaluation. May not be able to get them based on road impact analysis, based on water and sewer analysis. All that stuff has to be analyzed to make sure the infrastructure is in place to allow that. So that's part of the development review process. What we're just trying to say here is, we're trying to say if they were able to meet all the development requirements, all the comprehensive concurrency requirements, would this use be okay? Is residential in this area as opposed to maybe an auto mall, or in conjunction with commercial and residential, is an option, like I said. Is it okay to insert some residential in this area?
No.
That's the policy decision.
No.
Just a quick little joke. And that gentleman sitting down there alone, when they were going to put the auto mall in, it's Cookie, what do you think? I says, I love it. You know why? If the cars make too much noise, we just turn them off. And that's the end of the noise. Thank you. Appreciate it. I just want to bring my point out of where we're stepping.
Mr. Barber, you have a question?
Yeah, but said development, if this was, if approved, would it cause any kind of ripple effect within the city?
Would it have a ripple effect in the
Yeah.
city? No. That's because we are only amending the employment center land use, and the employment center land use can only be on that side of that.
Well, I mean, legally, no. Politically, yes.
That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
Down the road, if it comes back.
Somebody could make the argument, you approved it over there, why not
Thank
approve
you,
it?
that's
Well,
exactly.
yeah, you can do that, but that can happen,
Yeah, okay.
that can happen anytime.
And I know it does happen in the town, that's what I'm saying, but say the development get approved, what's it gonna cause down the road?
To make changes down the road, and I think it's really important to understand that, to me, the policy setting, legislative action, quasi-judicial. To make changes on this side of I-4 that would allow the density that they're talking about on the auto mall, the Orange Camp side of I-4, you would have to make more legislative changes. And with legislative changes, you don't really have to justify no. You can say no. You know, you have a lot of discretion. As long as you don't abuse your discretion, you can say you have a lot of leeway in how your local government is planned to grow. You don't have leeway once you set these regulations, and once you take the legislative action, and now you apply it to somebody who submits an application, it's much harder to say no. Because now you put the rules in place.
Right, okay.
So, yes, but anything is subject to change. You know, everything in the city is subject. Nothing is firmly set in the city. So everything development-wise can change, but it takes a policy decision, and at that point in time. But just approving the EC on that side of I-4 does not mean that somebody has an entitlement or a right or legal argument that they should get it somewhere else. Do they have the political argument? Sure, but they can always have, you know, those type of arguments.
You also have questions for Mr. Simpson? Attorney Simpson, the ordinance that was presented, where was that? How was that? Who drafted that? It looks like it was a combination.
Well, probably it came from, I mean, it definitely was a combination of work, but with comments back and forth, but I think it came out of the applicant's lawyer's office.
Okay, and just to be clear, we're only talking about the land that's under the current, we'll call it the auto mall property, not the property that's part of Lake Helen, that's part of the Victoria Park DRI. And the DRI, Development Regional Impact, will take precedence, so to speak, over our comprehensive plan.
Correct. We were only talking about the auto mall area. The thing that's basically, the area that's basically planned for the auto mall, that's the area we're talking about.
Lee, do you have something to add?
I just wanted to say, well, two things. I want to introduce the next speaker, but before I do that, I just want to elaborate a little bit on the role of the comp plan, and Scott has talked about it already, but very rarely do we discuss the comp plan in our routine day-to-day activities, because we deal with usually the zoning and those activities in land development regulations, and they all come after the comp plan. The comp plan is the foundation document, and it's really, I refer to it as the vision statement of the citizens. It's how the citizens view this particular community, how they want to view the community in the year 2035. What will it look like, feel like, and act like in the year 2035? And so it's an extremely important document from that particular perspective. It just so happened that when the property was annexed in 2018, their use of the land was concurrent with the triangle that you saw above that, which was the EC. And so it was an easy change for the comp plan at that time, just to take that EC and move it down to include this particular property. Now, the change that's before you today is radical, well, I would call it radically different, because where no residential is allowed, they want to put in 452 units of residential living. And that is a significant change, and I think goes to the heart of the whole citizen vision of what they would like to have in their community. With that preamble, let me introduce John Patterson. As he comes in, let me just say something that I think is relatively humorous. As you know, I'm the city administrator, I'm also the city clerk, and the city treasurer. What else am I? But I'm also, the last one I want to mention is I'm the city planner, all by charter. And so the city commission had the wisdom to actually hire a real planner who will address you now. John Patterson was with the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council, and he has analyzed the ordinance, and he has a PowerPoint presentation to show you. So let me just, without further ado, let him, if it's okay, Mr.
Yes.
Chairman, let him take over.
And then we'll hear from the applicant.
Thank you. And just for record again, John Patterson, East Central Florida Regional Planning Council. We're basically a kind of quasi-governmental agency representing 9 counties and will provide technical assistance to smaller communities such as yours for the most part. There can be larger ones too, but they tend to be smaller communities to provide assistance like this. When you get complex issues that may be above a city's expertise, for example. So we can start the PowerPoint. Most of this I can actually I was going to look through it real quickly because so much of it was covered so eloquently by Scott and by me. The next screen. Okay, and as we mentioned, this is about the Lake Helen Forest is about 3.64 acres, and it should be noted. And this is important. The language says that the residential uses are to be in support of commercial. That commercial does not have to be within the city of Lake Helen. And that's what's happening here. The commercial is going into the land side of the property, just to the east. And to me, it brings up an important thing because one of the issues that I discussed is kind of a community like Lake Helen where there isn't imbalance between residential and commercial. That puts more of a tax burden on residences. Commercial is generally known to bring in more revenue, but take less in services. You don't take much money out of your services. Okay, go please. And we've all seen that map. It's just a little area just to the left is the land portion, right in that area there. Yes, exactly. Right in that portion is where the commercial portion of the project would go. So in this case, we would be getting residential tax dollars, but not getting the impacts from the commercial. The land would be getting those. Next slide, please. And we've got the numbers here. We've just discussed those. We potentially could have not set the stone as up tonight from 3 to 5 stories. We didn't open the height of the apartments, but that's still in the air. There's nothing solid there. That's not really the issue tonight. Tonight's just the ability to eventually get the right to build residential on that property. Next slide, please. And just go through some of these changes here. Basically, your table 2.2 or subsection 11.2.b, which has basically changed some things in the comp plan regarding employment center, regarding acreages. There have been some annexations that were addressed in the comp plan. Vacant acreages, percentage of future land use within the city for the employment center, as well as adding potential residential units within the district. Next slide. Also, updating commercial land use district to add the supporting land uses for commercial uses in the employment center district to including a mix of residential housing types and styles. And under the third table here, actually is where it's talking more the density issues and talking about the initial proposal. It could go below but not above these numbers for 300 apartments, 150 townhouses, 452 total units altogether. And it would be under planned development. Now, under planned development, what happens when you have a planned development zoning project? Density is not set as it is in other areas of the city. Density comes through eventually through a development agreement. We're discussing some of the densities today with the number of units, but ultimately, that's what sets density in stone. Next slide. Okay. And yeah, okay, let's go ahead and provided the different ordinances, goals, objectives, and policies that should say the comprehensive plan that are this projected change would implement. And we agree with them. There's one we came across, in accordance with the City Commission, it may need to be adjusted. Next slide. And that was, there's the, under objective 1.1.12, future land use element talks about land use being in place for commercial development, both east and west of the I-4 interchange. And if this were the case, you are taking some of that commercial away, the potential for that, possibly. It could be partially commercial, partially residential, but it is adding something new to the mix, which could potentially impact future commercial. Next slide, please. And that's what I was mentioning here. That was the one area of the comp plan that we had previously missed, that would have to have some language changed in the ordinance or added to the ordinance before going to commission to find this proposal in compliance with the comprehensive plan. Next slide, please. And the land development code, it has two sections, 1320.01 and 1320.02, where all the conditions have to be met. And in my staff report, I went further into that, but I found, in my professional opinion as a planner, they were not met. And I have a slide coming up as a table that just basically shows you by number all the conditions, what category I felt was where they were lacking, or what category they fell under. And that's explained in full scale in the actual staff report you have. Just for brevity's purposes, I'm not going to go through those. You just have the table that describes that. Next slide. And after that, please. There we go. That kind of goes through the different conditions and what areas. For example, there's areas that we're dealing with the density and the size of the development, how it can sit with the area, impacts on infrastructure or services to the city, which could be things like police and fire, which was something I was concerned with, raised concerns about. Issues with the impact on the citizens, how it financially impacts as far as the millage rate and what the citizens pay as taxes versus, comparing the multifamily residential versus commercial development. And using basic academic knowledge on that, typically for commercials, cities that are more residential, lacking the commercial, that is often something being sought, add more commercial, so the tax base is spread out further, more people are paying into it, less burden on the residents. Next, please. Okay. And the last two, these were also two additional ones from the land development code that had to be met, which I felt were not meeting in those cases. But I just brought those up to there. And it explained up here in the actual staff report the reasons why. Next, please. Okay. For the number 2 was just the proposed comp plan amendment, and that complies with the comp plan. For the one reason we mentioned that can be changed, but it's also more from the LDC regulations. Those 10 conditions that were in there that were identifying concerns, and based on the fact that I felt that 3.20.01 and 3.21.02 were not being met, I did recommend it out. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Patterson. Thank you, Mr. Patterson. We'll hear from the attorney, Mr. Dillon, for the
Mr. Chair, Commissioners. It's been a long time to get to this phase, and I've been in front of many of you other citizens and planning board members or commissioners now for 6 years on the auto mall and its various shapes and forms. And a lot has changed in the world. A lot has changed on Orange Camp Road since we were last here, and it was a 2-lane road, and construction hadn't even started on the widening. There was no roundabout. Victoria Gardens wasn't as big as it is today. Victoria Trails wasn't as big. Victoria Oaks didn't exist. A lot of the neighborhoods to the north of the employment center area that we're talking about here didn't exist. A lot of the neighborhoods up and down the MLK corridor, the Beersford extension was just a concept, not a reality. Now it's starting to be planned. Won't be long before it connects to Summit. Change continues to happen. It is inevitable, and it is often difficult to deal with, and we all do the best that we can to manage it in the ways that we can. And I think that your attorney did a good job of laying out what we are here doing today and what we are not here doing today. We are not here today asking you to give us permission to build any number of apartments or any number of townhomes or where exactly they may go or what they might look like or what the roads are to get to them or what they will be made out of or built out of or how tall they are. We're talking about a very, very general comp plan change. And we're talking about it, and I think it's important that the attorney pointed out that when this first started and when the auto mall project first started, and for that matter when Lake Helen pre-existed I-4, of course, which is how we got this weird big triangle of land stuck out there off to the side. Right? And back in the late 90s, mid-90s, when they started talking about the concept of Victoria Park, and I'm sure some people in the room hear the word DRI and they don't even know what it stands for. It stands for Development of Regional Impact. Right? And that's one of the reasons I brought up all the things that have changed just in this last 7 years even. It's not just a neighborhood, it's not just a PD, it's not just a subdivision. It's a development of regional impact. It has a whole code in the Florida statutes that talks about the way they're governed and the way they're planned and the way that they come together and the way that they're changed. And the big part of it is right in the name. When a project as large as Victoria Park comes to fruition, it's entitled, I believe, 4,700 homes for the maximum capacity there. It's got the Victoria Park Village Center. It's got some offices and restaurants and shops in it. And then it had this green area that you see on the screen, and then just a little red tip. If you continue the green area down straight until you hit I-4, you have that. Lake Helen had no frontage on Orange Camp Road. There was no Lake Helen property. The red property, other than what would have continued straight down, was not Lake Helen. And originally when we went to talk to Lake Helen and DeLand about the concept of the auto mall, we had a layout on the buildings which was such that if you continued that line straight down, it was going to cut a building right in half. Didn't make any sense, didn't make a building small enough to just be on the Lake Helen side, and nobody wants a building cut in half by a city limit line. And so we had some talks with DeLand and said, well, let's move the Lake Helen line. Actually, we wanted to move it quite a bit farther over and capture about 6 buildings. DeLand said they didn't want to do it. They are the ones that control the water and the sewer. It's their utility service area. Therefore, they should be the only people that get to annex any of this land. We had very long conversations. Lake Helen officials had conversations. We said it's not really fair. Lake Helen desperately needs the commercial development. They're not going to get it up to the north ever unless this stuff down by Orange Camp Road develops, because there's no road, there's no utilities. This area, this red area in general, and that little part of gray that goes to Orange Camp that's also part of this, that has to get built to give access to that area to the north, to that employment center. So we thought it made sense to at least get 3 or 4 buildings in. The land said no. And so we actually went ahead and filed an annexation working with Lake Helen to annex the entire thing in. Nothing in the land. 0%. 100% Lake Helen. All 50 acres. And the land sued Lake Helen. And Mr. Hurley and I for Automall LLC paid for the defense of Lake Helen in that lawsuit. And we fought over it, and what we had originally proposed was about 10 acres in Lake Helen. Would have been willing to take 5 or 6, just not cut a building in half, but instead, we said, fine, we'll take 50. And ultimately, the compromise was we got 36, right? So, and it was referred to a lot during that process along the time as bonus land, right? It was land that was not previously part of Lake Helen, was never planned to be until this development came along and we annexed it in. Obviously, fast forward, a lot of things changed in 2020. At a time in 2016, 15, 16, 17, when this was being pursued, dealerships were taking away the rights for dealerships to dealership owners across the country because they weren't taking enough inventory. Take more inventory, take more inventory. Dealerships in the land were renting lots off-site to store vehicles because if they didn't take the inventory from the manufacturer, they got their dealership threatened to be taken away. So the concept was, one, get out by the interstate, get that frontage just like you see at the Daytona Auto Mall, right? Get that exposure, that advertising, free advertising. But also the concept was go up. We don't have dirt here to hold the inventory, so as you know, what is currently entitled today, what can be built today, no planning board approval necessary, no city commission approval necessary, it's already been approved, is we can build about 144,000 square feet of air-conditioned dealership space on the property we're talking about today, and they can be 80 feet tall with parking garages on top. That's allowed today. We don't need to go get permission, it's already been voted on, it already happened, right? So we're not talking about the difference of do we want to allow residential versus the trees and the grass that are there right now today. We're talking about right now what is entitled. And the auto mall is never going to happen. Right? So essentially right now, until something changes, nothing will ever be built on that 36 acres in Lake Helen. It's an EC. Period. It's the only thing that's allowed under the land development. So if anything's ever going to be built, there has to be a change of some kind. Now what the market has told us over the last 6 years is that this area can't sustain a 50-acre commercial development. It won't happen. For context, go down the road, go down Orange Camp to the public shopping center. Okay? If you're facing that public shopping center, you've got the road that goes to Chick-fil-A, and Chick-fil-A off to the left, then you go all the way to Orange Camp Road. So you have all those out parcels, you've got Kiki's, you've got the haircut place and smoothie place, you've got the Publix building. That's 25 acres, all right? And it's taken 7, 8 years for it to get built out on 1792 with twice the commercial traffic count that Orange Camp Road has at I-4, right? Because for commercial real estate, they don't count I-4 as traffic count. It's the local roads that count as traffic count. So when a Panera or whatever is looking, they look at the traffic count for it. So we could, say for example, say, you know what, we don't want a land use change, we're going to keep it commercial. Let's just take all the uses that are allowed on the 16, 17 acres that are the land side. Let's just expand that. So instead of auto dealerships, we can have restaurants, retail, offices. Let's just do that, and then we can have commercial. Well, what are you realistically looking at in the market when you do that? Down the road, where there's a lot more traffic, it's taken 8 years to fill up half of that. Right? And it's barbershops, Chinese takeout, right? Those kind of things. The kind of things you probably won't even get that the farther you get away from frontage road. Remember, Stewart Road has to go away as part of this. So when it gets built, frontage road, which is the little curvy gray section you see going up, that'll be the access point. So you end up with a thing where unless you have destination retail like the auto mall, right? There's nothing like it within 30 miles. So people will come to it because of that. And so they have no choice but to drive back in there to get to the auto mall. If you had something maybe like a super Target, right? Or a super Walmart, you could probably, destination retail would probably be saleable. But the traffic on Orange Camp Road won't allow that. That's way too much traffic. The traffic count blows out of the water. We couldn't do it. It wouldn't be possible. So what will the market bear? Well, we know because the only people who want to go under contract for anything that's potentially feasible out there is multifamily in town. Right? Now let's talk about a couple things on that real quickly. Cookie, I couldn't agree with you more, right? Density is always the word of the day. Right? Density in the wrong spot is awful. But density is not always the enemy. Sometimes density is the enemy of the things we fear the most and don't want in good planning. Density is the enemy of urban sprawl, for example. Density is the enemy of traffic counts if the density is providing a place to live next to a workplace, like this example. If it's providing a place to live next to your commuter route, like I-4, right? If the apartment is 2 miles off of the interstate, then the person who goes to work every day puts 4 miles of trips on the road to get to the interstate just to go where they're going. As opposed to if they're a quarter mile away, they get on the interstate and they go. I think the one thing everybody has so far been able to agree on with this project is that everybody desperately wants a convenience store at that corner of Forge Camp and Frontage Road. It's about the only agreement I've had long term from anybody on this one. But density is not always the enemy, right? Density is the enemy of sprawl. It is the friend of green space, because if you can house 300 units on 10 acres, instead of spreading them out on 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 foot wide lots, single family homes, that's typically the enemy, or the friend of urban sprawl, right? So here we've got the multifamily use, which also, let's not talk anecdotally when we have a specific piece of dirt. It is true, anecdotally, single family homes compared to commercial is a loser for a city. You barely get enough tax revenue to pay for the municipal services, for utilities, for fire, for police. You barely get enough out of your taxes to pay for it. Especially if you have some lower value properties and you put homestead exemptions on top of it, veteran exemptions on top of it, widow exemptions on top of it, all the exemptions we have, you all know too well, your city's plagued by it, right? There are no homestead exemptions on multifamily. There is a lot of value in that. And I'm going to say this as kindly as I can. Now, in your staff report, if you go through and look on the items of whether or not this complies with the comp plan, the staff, the contract planner says yes on every single element, except one, and I'm going to address that. The other ones are whether or not, and you go through these 9 factors in your land development code of things to consider when contemplating recommended approval, or ultimately it will be the commission who decides whether or not to approve. Things to consider, but it is not a you must check all 9 of these boxes to move on. It is these are the factors you should consider when weighing the pros versus the cons. Right? Those, I suspect, were mostly written by your city administrator, who, as he said, is the administrator, the clerk, the treasurer, the planner. But he's not the president or the czar of Lake Helen, right? The people elect the city commission to ultimately make those decisions. The city commission was curious enough about this possibility that in April of 2021, we held a workshop. And we said, look, this is kind of what we're thinking right now. The automoble's not going to happen. Here's a general idea. Do you want us to even waste your city staff's time in looking at this or not? If you don't, if you have no interest, tell us to get out and we won't even send an application. They said do it. We may say no, but do it. It's worth considering. We need to evaluate our options. Right? So we tried for the last almost 2 years to get here today, but we were told for a while that the application was lost. We must not have submitted it despite the checks being cashed. We were told multiple times that the application was incomplete. We do this every now and then, and in fact, of course, we did this with the annexation and the comp plan change and the land use change, the zoning change last time. But we had to fight through a lot of that, and thankfully, Mr. Simpson has been very helpful in helping move us along, especially after we had to have another meeting after requesting it for about a year. And finally sat down and the mayor helped and said, yeah, well, why haven't you come forward? We said, we've been trying. So here we are. So thank you. We're here. What are we asking for? We're asking for the possibility to consider a change that would allow a zoning application and a development agreement to allow residential down the road. Your commission thought enough about wanting to see it that they agreed to pay, I believe, up to $15,000, I think, for an economic study to say what would it look like. That report came out late last week. Debunked a lot of what was in these staff comments about, oh, well, it's just going to be too expensive. I guess we can't afford this project. Well, the consultant that the city hired, that I believe also does the city's auditing and everything else, pretty familiar with the city's financing, said, not only will you be able to bear it, but when this is built out, you'll be looking at a net $550,000 a year of revenue net, not gross, net, after expenses, after burdens. And that's unencumbered revenue. That's not counting the impact fees that will come in to help pay for new police cars and things like that. All those expenses have been considered in that report. All will be paid for, more $300-some thousand for capital improvements included. Right? I said we don't want to talk about the anecdotal when we have a specific site. I'm talking about that multifamily. Multifamily is, for all practical purposes, from a tax-based perspective, just about the same thing as commercial. Especially in a site like this where Lake Helen doesn't have to run 1 inch of sewer line, 1 inch of water line, does not have to build 1 linear foot of roadway, doesn't have to do any of those things. Will have to provide police services, possibly in an interlocal agreement with the land since the boundary's right there together, but would have to provide that. But the density that allows that value, what we're talking about, according to your city's expert report, is a $90 million increase to the tax rolls as far as taxable value of property compared to the vacant land. So it's something to be considered. It may be that at the end of the day, you all or the commission say, well, it would be nice. That would certainly allow us to have any chance of paying the debt service on the $13 million bond that's being recommended to the city for much needed infrastructure. It would be nice to have that option, because I'm not sure that there's a couple $100 extra thousand laying around right now when these taxes are raised. So it would be nice to have that option. And that's what we're asking for today at this phase, options. Is it possible to allow residential on some dirt that was not part of the comp plan when the policy was written that said only commercial east of I-4? This did not exist as part of Lake Helen when that policy was written. So the only part that the planning agency said doesn't comply with the comp plan was a part that was written before this dirt was part of the city of Lake Helen. So let's start with that one. And that is objective 1.14. We have to break it down into a couple of parts. One I just mentioned, commercial development west of I-4. We're not taking away any opportunity for commercial development west of I-4. We're adding the possibility of residential, as your attorney said. We are not taking away anything. This is only an add, not a takeaway. Okay. The second part, it would allow exclusive residential development within the properties west of I-4 within the Orange Camp Point project. Would not mandate it, right? Is it possible with the layout that we proposed? It'll all depend on engineering. That's a step down the road. If the mix isn't right, if the market study says, you know what, we don't think the market will support 300 apartment units. These are maximums that we're asking for. Not it'll happen. These are maximums under the comp plan. There could be no more than 300. There could be no more than 152. It could be that if this were amended to allow those, that when we come forward back in the development agreement and say, well, this is how we would put those 300 and the 152, you may say, and the commission may say, no, that's too much. Now that we've seen the engineering, we've seen the stormwater, we don't see enough open space, we don't see enough bike paths, we don't see enough park area. Nope, not going to do it. Okay, it was a cap. It was never a you must build it, it's a cap. So that's one I want to say. Is it possible that we could come back with a plan that shows 300 apartment units, 152 townhomes, and there's no room for commercial on Lake Helen side right there? It's possible. It's entirely possible. It's entirely possible that if that happens and this road is built up to the Stuart Howard property, then finally after 25 years somebody starts to look at that employment center workplace for Victoria Park and considers building it. They're not going to right now. Certainly not with the decreased demand in commercial office parks, right? They're not going to go to one of the hardest places to build. It's wet, it doesn't have a road, it doesn't have utilities. You can have one of those things, but it can't have all of those things. Right now it's a very unattractive property to build. If this project goes forward and the road goes all the way up with utility connections, it becomes a lot more attractive. So it may not be commercial here, but again, a 300 unit apartment complex, from a tax perspective, And this may be something that the city commission wants to have James Moore look at further. Compare that usage of that acreage versus an out parcel with a McDonald's, a Burger King, and something else you would see at an I-4 interstate exit, right? And that also changes the complexion. This is another part of the commercial side. These two sides, the commercial side and the residential side, the land side, like, they don't exist independently of each other. If there's no rooftops right there up against this property, it's going to change the nature of what goes in commercially right there. Pretty easy. C-store on the hard corner. Frontage Road in Orange Camp is going to have a convenience store with gas. That one's a no-brainer. Beyond that, what goes next to it? Is it the kind of place where you go in and have your order taken at the table, or is it a McDonald's? Well, is it just an interstate exit, or is it a neighborhood? That'll dictate what kind of commercial development goes in. Right? The third point, the reason saying since they're under separate ownership, there's no guarantee that future development of lands to the north would be developed as commercial uses. Well, they can't be developed as anything else for the reasons your lawyer laid out. It's part of the DRI that Lake Helen and DeLand and Victoria Park were all a party to, and the Stewart House. Unless everybody signs on to change that to residential, it can't be, right? This amendment wouldn't allow it to go all the way up there anyway because it geographically restricts it to right here. And you're putting a total cap. There's a reason for that total cap, right? A couple of the things we did when we built in the nature of this application were with what we've learned from working with Lake Helen for the last 8 years and 10 years ago. And I'm no dummy about the nature of small town stuff either, having grown up in between a town of 8,000 and 2,000. Okay? And my wife from a town of 400, you think Lake Helen's small, yeah, it's in Parkersburg, Illinois. I get it. And I also live closer to this site than a lot of people in Lake Helen do. So I get it, and I care about what goes out here too. The cap is there for a reason, right? If we say 300 units, and where we said 18 units per acre, that applies to all of EC, right? So we can really pack density on because the denominator is the entire EC. What we've said is, you know what, no matter what, doesn't matter where you put it, you can't have more than this, period. Doesn't matter how you cut it up, how you try to do the math, how you wiggle property lines around. It can never be more than this. That's the reason we're proposing a cap on the number of units. Engineering may not allow it. We can never go over that. We may not achieve that, but it could never go over that for all of EC. So if we were to build that, even if Lake Helen, DeLand, the Stewart Howard family, everybody else said, okay, the residential restriction is off. We're taking that out of the DRI. We're going to allow it in the terms of the DRI. Your comp plan still wouldn't allow it because this amendment would put a cap on it. Right? Somebody would have to come back and get permission to amend the comp plan again. So yes, it's true. It's no guarantee that somebody may come along and actually develop the employment center. But let's contemplate it the way it stands today. No road, no utilities, no place for any employees to eat or live nearby without driving several miles to do it, except for a couple spots in the Victoria Park Village Center. Right? Versus if there are a road and there are utilities and there were apartments there or townhomes there for the workforce to do the live, eat, work, play development that we see has become so popular because it's good planning. So the only place that the planners have said it doesn't comply with the comp plan, I don't believe for valid reasons. And especially the part about absolutely absolutely only commercial on the west side of I-4 when this wasn't even part of the Helen. All the other parts, the transportation element, future land use element, the housing element, all parts of the housing element, the public facilities element, conservation element, the recreation element, the capital improvement element, the intergovernmental coordination element, all of them comply with the comp plan. That's per your statute. When you go further into the code section 1320.01 requirements, this is the next section of the staff report. Now this is the part that's just in your land development regulations that says the commission shall consider all of these factors when considering property. It doesn't say you have to meet them all. It says these are the things you should be thinking about. And then it goes on to say whether or not it's there. And I presume Mr. Beck wrote this. Requested uses are compatible with existing or planned uses in the surrounding area. Staff finding. It's not compatible because there's no apartments nearby. Well, let's just think about that one for a minute. If that were the criteria, then we would just only see little clusters of apartments, little islands of apartments in communities. There would never be apartments mixed in with single family. There would never be apartments in commercial highway zoning, which we know not to be the case because just about every B4, C4 classification, including the B4 county zoning that was on a big section of this property before we changed it, that allowed multifamily development, right? It allowed up to 16 units per acre previously. That was already entitled here before. We didn't include it in what got approved as the auto mall because we didn't think we needed it at the time, but that is a typical use, especially in this kind of area, again, where density is supposed to live. There are places for density, and in a community like ours where we don't have big downtown with high-rise apartments, you put density next to the major transportation corridors. It overall reduces traffic on our local road networks, it consolidates utilities, you put density where it should live and where it should be smart. Right? It's also a little bit inaccurate in that there is actually townhome density in Victoria Park or Victoria Commons. There's actually quite a bit of it right there. Helps transition, again, transitory, right? Commercial, high density, single family, right? Having those all together is a transition and complementary use to each other. Staff finding, will approval of the request be consistent with population density pattern? This is number 3. By the way, first I skipped over number 1. Is it consistent with the comp plan? The planner already said it is. Every single category is consistent with the comp plan except the one that we addressed. So why there's a different finding in this on the C portion of that? 2, I addressed. Number 3, will be consistent with the population density pattern, not place an undue burden on existing transportation or other services, utilities, and facilities will be capable of adequately being served by them. Well, let's break that down. Staff says it'll place an undue burden on city county services. The land is serving the water and utilities. It's providing it, not Lake Helen. There is no burden on the Lake Helen Utility Department. The only thing you have to do is collect a royalty. That's it. So there's the accounting expense because you can add a fee to what the land charges since they're near city limits. There is no accounting expense. By the way, the financial report didn't take that into account. So there's actually more money coming in. I don't know how much. Could be $10, could be $10,000. I don't know. But it's not accounted for in the economic report, and you can charge a surcharge.
Can I ask a question here, Mr. Chairman? Sure. So it's my understanding the capacity would be for up to 1,000 residents, right?
So the capacity calculation on the engineering side is basically by fixture, right? So right now we have a general statement from the land utilities that their sewer and water system can handle this overall, right? But then it'll come down to, again, at a much later state, let's say if the land use is approved and we're going for a zoning development agreement to actually get a certain number of units approved, we would have to go to the utility provider and say, this many bathrooms, this many showers, this many sinks.
That's my question.
Right.
Is that, have you gotten assurances or agreement with the city to provide sewer and water?
So
1,000 residents.
we have
the number of units that you're asking.
Correct. We have the general, yes, there's capacity, but we can't submit a request and get invested to have a right to build that until we actually have a right to build it, right? We're not even allowed to build residential right now.
So you don't have the capacity reserved, do you?
It's impossible to
So
have.
first come, first served, we'll get the capacity.
It is technically first come, first served. No one can have a reservation unless they have a zoning right and an entitlement. And we don't have a zoning right or entitlement. So that reservation point would kick in at the time. So if we end up coming back before you 2 months from now with the PD amendment, we would at that point have a letter from DeLand Utilities saying this number of units, we have capacity. And if the zoning got approved, at that point we would be vested in the system. But it's impossible before that, legally.
So you're saying there's no city staff to be involved in anything across the bridge?
I'm sorry.
Any city staff, you're saying that everything's going to be, Lee, is this going to have a problem with any of our services?
I'm sorry, I have trouble hearing with the mask.
Our services, city crew, are we going to service that across the bridge?
For utilities?
Yes,
No.
our utilities, as far as the parks and rec, the roads and stuff like that.
We will supply parks and recreation services to the residents, and we do to all the residents. The roads they indicate will be private, but of course that's subject to change, and therefore we calculated no cost for roads. Utilities are served by DeLand. Developers pay for the infrastructure for utilities, not the city of
The police
DeLand.
department as far as the city.
I'm sorry?
The police department and the city.
The police department is ours, and it will have to serve, we've calculated 3 officers additional needed for that particular service. I think we're conservative, it could be more. Fire will be responsible, that'll be paid for by assessment, and we've already checked to make sure that we can have 2 separate districts. So the fire demand services required by this particular development will not impinge on the cost of citizens of the remainder of Lake Helen. So we'll have to supply both fire and water, but
So we'll have some effect on our
I'm
staff.
sorry.
It will have some effect on our staff, is what I'm getting at.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Compared to right now, what is entitled is fire services that have to service 80-foot tall auto facilities with auto garages and oil and gasoline and all of those things, and the police services that have to serve all those things as well. So we're not comparing it to servicing the empty woods, we're comparing it to what's already entitled on this change. So that's one important factor to always keep in mind too. There are entitlements on this land currently, and it is already in the city limits of Lake Helen. So we're not talking about adding jurisdiction to Lake Helen. We're obviously talking about this would change the nature of what is allowed to be built there. But right now, fire trucks would have to put out a fire if there were, if the automobile got built, they'd have to put out a fire and leave the building. That all is part of the process that we will have to go through at a next stage down the road if we want to seek a development agreement. One of the things we have to do is meet, it's called a development review committee or a technical review committee, depends which city calls it what. We do it jointly by agreement under the existing automobile agreement between DeLand and Lake Helen and the county in this instance because of fire services. But one of the things we would have to say is one of the things they would look at when we propose a layout and say, well, we want to put these apartment buildings here, this is where we want to put the roads, this is where we want to put the fire hydrants. That's one of the things that they weigh in on at that phase and say, we're not signing off on this development unless we have verified that we have the fire capacity, we verify that we have the right hydrant placement, we verify that we have the right level of road access, unimpeded. Those are all part of the process. We went through it before to build the automobile site, get that concept approved, and we would have to go through it again before this would ever move forward.
I just have something to say about it, and that is that after being in town for 34 years, being on the commission, involved with the city on a lot of things. All we worked for all these years, and that is we need some commercial property to up our tax rates and do things. But after a while, as a citizen, okay, I'm speaking for myself, not the board, but myself. And that is, after all these years, when that gentleman sitting over there said he was going to put an auto mall in here, you don't know how excited, believe me, how many people in this town was excited because we were getting our commercial park, which would take care of a lot of the taxes and everything else. So we were very excited about it and everything else. And as we go along, everything seemed to be going along, but as business goes, I've been in business 60 years. Sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down. But I just want to explain how we were so excited about what you were going to do, and then everything was there. And then all of a sudden, it doesn't happen. So we figured, well, DeLand's going to have a hotel, DeLand's going to have this and stuff. We should be able to get some kind of commercial property in there that we can move forward and do taxing. Even if it wasn't the whole thing at one time, at least we get some commercial in there and go on. Now, I said gentlemen, I didn't hear that. And I said, as he says, yes, there can be the two of them if it was done right. But the way this I wasn't involved in the comp plan, so you can't blame me for that. But anyhow, the way the comp plan reads, it's not making it any easier to make this thing work. And my thing is, what are we gonna do to make it work? And that's my question.
So, question number 5, element number 5, proposed change consistent with the established land use pattern in a non-grade and isolated district unrelated to adjacent nearby districts. Staff report, see response to number 2, which says there's no apartments nearby. I call this one a little bit, and I mean this from an academic and planning perspective. That comment's a little bit absurd. For the reason that we just talked about, this is right next to and surrounded by on 2 sides the Victoria Park Development of Regional Impact, which has 4,177 dwelling units, and just to the north, right? Let's keep in mind this too. I know a lot of Victoria Gardens residents don't realize this because whatever their salespeople didn't tell them, or they didn't do their homework before they bought. But that green area has entitlements on it. There is a land use entitlement. There's a density entitlement there already. How dense do you think it is? 100,000 square feet of commercial? 200,000? 3? 4? 5? Keep going. It is entitled for 775,000 square feet of commercial development in buildings 80 feet tall. The setback requirement between commercial and residential, and some of those residences go right up to the line, is about 50 feet. About 50 or 60 feet. That's how far set back the commercial development has to be from the houses that exist. That's done. That's approved. Nobody has to vote on it. Right? That's already in place. Right? That's already there. You know what? I forgot to put the number in there, but it's something crazy. I want to say it's somewhere along the range of about 7,000 parking spaces are included in the entitlements to serve that area. So when we talk about density and intensity, this has been planned as part of that 2035 vision plan, as part of the DRI that Lake Helen signed off for and said, yeah, we're up for this. We know what might happen. We're hopeful, in fact, that this will lead to the development of this employment center. This little bit of space that we had at the time, just a little bit of space west of I-4, now a lot more. We're hopeful that this is going to lead to a very intense development on the west side of I-4. We're not asking for densities that are abnormal for multifamily and townhomes. We're asking for very standard densities for multifamily and townhomes in an area that is incredibly dense by design and plan and has already been approved to be dense by design and plan. The intensity of what we already have approved with the Automall use, the traffic generation for the Automall use is 2.5 or 3 times higher than if the maximum number of townhomes and apartments were built out. It's 3.5 times higher. So this is not. Is it intense compared to a field? Yes, of course, right? Anything is compared to that. But is it intense compared to what's already entitled? No, this is effectively a downzoning if, not a zoning because it's land use, but if ultimately we come back and ask to change the zoning to use mostly residential or some residential in here, any addition of residential to this compared to the Automall will be a overall less intense, less dense use than what is currently allowed. That's, I think, important to point that out because, as we mentioned before, density is important. This is not more dense. It's not more intense. It's less. Not to mention the effect it will have on taking trips off the road. Nobody who would live in these apartments or townhomes currently lives closer to getting on I-4 than they will if they live there.
Sure.
Right? So it's not going to add any miles to the road. They already live somewhere, and they already drive from where they live to the grocery store and get to work and everything else. It's not going to add trips to the road. Right? And sometimes these things are counterintuitive. Right now there's a tentative proposal to put a Publix at the corner of Kepler and 44. And I want to bring this up for an example because one of the first things I hear when people hear that is, oh my gosh, the traffic at that intersection, it's already so bad, this will only make it worse. Will it? This is where things are a little counterintuitive. Right now, there are about 1,500 trips a day that drive through that intersection, either on their way to the Publix on ISB or on their way to the Publix on Orange Camp, and now they're cutting that trip in half or more to go to the grocery store right there. It will actually take tens of thousands of miles of trips off the road network every year. So sometimes these things are a little bit counterintuitive. That doesn't mean we can't have a valid opinion of I don't want Publix there. Someone can believe that, right? But there's opinions and there's facts, right? And the fact is, the people that will live in these apartments already live somewhere. The apartments, and there's another element, I'll just jump to it. Is there a need in the neighborhood or community for apartments? A mile and a half away in the Integra apartments that were built on MLK, filled up faster than any Integra project in 10 years. It was to full occupancy within something ridiculous like 9 months. Usually they have like a 2-year or 2.5 year ramp-up rate. It was full in 9 months. Because that's how desperate the area is for nice rental apartments and nice units. So, is there a neighborhood need? The market says there is, otherwise people wouldn't be willing to spend millions of dollars for building. Proposed change will be compatible with improvements or development of adjacent property. We just covered that one. Now this is the most ridiculous one, especially in light of the economic study that just came out, number 8. In the current economic climate, developer would project rating, but staff finds that this change would be detrimental to the economic interests of the citizens of Lake Helen, who would be stuck with continued high millage rate and thus high taxes. And I would love to hear an explanation of this one in light of the economic report that the city gave.
Any planning school will teach you that.
In the first year,
Here's my report, by the way.
in the first year, your economic consultant that does your finances and does your audit and knows where your expenses are and what your revenues are. Your economic consultant said in the first year there will be a net positive, and this is just on unencumbered funds. It doesn't count the hundreds of thousands of dollars in permit fees and impact fees. Just property tax and revenue unencumbered. $123,000 net impact in year 1. $285,000 net positive in year 2. $447,000 in year 3, $496,000 in year 4, $511,000 a year in year 5. That's a year of net benefit after expenses. We are not here to talk about the zoning part, right? But obviously the commission wanted to know what this kind of change might have an impact down the road, and that's what the economic professionals who do your books for you at the city said would be the economic impact. So to say that it will have a burden on the millage rate, I think it will, but I can't see how it would possibly go up. Not with $500,000 extra of net revenue after year 5. So this isn't about approving those apartments today, but it is about giving the commission the opportunity to consider a project that would have that sort of economic impact on the community. Again, as I understand it, there's a proposal for upwards of $10 million long-term bond obligation that's going to suck up a couple $100,000 a year of interest and principal payments to make some necessary improvements. And this is a source of revenue. Not maybe one day, sometime, 10 years from now, something might get built. This would be a real possibility, real flexibility for the near future. Number 9, substantial reasons exist why a reasonable use of property can't be accomplished under existing zoning. Yeah, it's not allowed. Pretty easy. And certainly you wouldn't want it on the other side. And that's actually one of the things early on that Mr. Simpson had suggested to me is, well, why don't we change one of the existing categories? And I said, because there's the domino effect, right? What effect might this have on the other side of the road? Well, EC is the only one that's only west of I-4, right? So let's keep it in EC, or create another one for EC, but I don't see the point in creating another one when one will do just fine if we amend it. But also down the road, we won't likely be considering changing another one unless there's a language in it that says, certain density only allowed on the west side. But it is, I know, very critical to Lake Helen. I know it's critical to you all's opinion and to the commission's opinion and to the residents' opinion that nothing like this ever go on the other side. Right? I don't think there will ever be will in the foreseeable future, decades down the road, long before all of us are gone. Lake Helen would never approve a project like this kind of density of apartments on this side of I-4. Never. And we would never ask for it, and we would never propose a structure where it's even possible. And it also wouldn't.
Why us?
And it also wouldn't be traffic along the road, net the water network or the sewer network. Right? So that's why structurally we're talking about EC, completely on I-4. And down the road we'll be talking about a new zoning category that's called like a mixed use west of I-4 PD zoning. Because EC PD zoning also only technically allows. And actually I think maybe what we landed on is we could modify the EC PD zoning. Again, because it only applies on this side. So, yeah, it can't happen on the west side, and it never should. For a lot of reasons it can't. Roads, for one. But for a lot of utilities, for another. Many, many things would have to change in the infrastructure for it ever to even be feasible, but none of this would allow it. There's no slippery slope. There's no back and forth. This notion of, well, if you approve this one, then somebody could just say you approved it over there. Yeah, for good reason. It's not on this side of I-4. It's on the other side, where the land can provide the utilities, where it's shielded with that kind of density, where it belongs, not on this side. And so that, it can't happen, and it shouldn't happen on the other side. So going through, as a whole, again, very important to understand why we are here and why we are not here. Whether this commission votes to recommend approval, or recommends denial, or recommends approval with conditions, if the applicant agrees to the conditions, it will go on to the city commission next, right? And they will take your advice into consideration on whether or not it makes sense, right? The presentation I make there will be largely the same one here unless the staff report changes. But right now, today is about options, right? Whether or not you say yes or no, right, just procedurally, it's just the fact of the way the procedure works, we'll still go on to the commission, we'll have this discussion again. And if the commission says, no, we're not going to do that, we just, whatever reason, it's a matter of policy, we don't want any residences, not one, not two, then that's the end of the conversation. But this is about options, this is about the chance to have that consideration. You've got your economic report, which I think helps paint that bigger picture of what possibly could be coming down the road. And we know from an economic standpoint, listen, if there was somebody willing to build an auto mall tomorrow, it would be built. We wouldn't be. By the way, the one comment in here about people profiting, yeah, that's what people do when they sell their land typically. I can tell you this, Mr. Hurley gets every possible penny, and everybody that buys this dirt, if they overpay by 50%, he's still going to have lost a significant amount of money on this project. The dream to build the auto mall was a long road, it was an expensive road, litigation with the land, carrying the taxes and the insurance on this property for 7 years. It's not a sob story. But I'm just telling you, one, it's a little bit unusual to see that in a staff comment, that someone might make money if we make this change is a reason staff shouldn't support it. I haven't seen that one before. I don't think we're supposed to be opposed to people getting a return on their investment in America.
The expensive residents we are.
I didn't interrupt you, Mr. Patterson.
I'm sorry, I was making a response.
Well, apology accepted. I didn't interrupt you.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
But this is about possibility. It's about opportunity. This is what the market is asking for. This is who the buyers are. This is what it would look like economically if we have the chance to explore it further. And keep in mind too, and I think your attorney said it, but I know all these things, when it's not human nature, you don't do it every day, it can be a little bit lost in the blur, right? Even if the comp plan amendment were approved, you approve it, the commission approves it, it goes up to the state approves it, it comes back down, we're gonna have to come forward with an amended PD that says, all right, now in our PD, maybe we'll say, we wanna take full advantage of that maximum 300 units and maximum 152 townhomes. Maybe we'll know by then we can't build that much. Or the people that want to buy it, can't build that much, or don't want to, maybe, but it won't be more than that, right? It can't be. And at that point, you may say, you know what? Not here. I don't like that. If you got rid of this one building and did a little pocket park for that community, so we don't have the burden on our Parks and Rec in the center of town, maybe, right? That's the time to talk about that level of details. We're at the 10,000 foot range today on comp change. We're not at the detail range. That you're going to have, and that'll be a longer meeting than this one. They always are. But that's the detail meeting. Today's the 10,000 foot view to have possibilities. Thanks.
Any questions? I have a couple of questions. I'm not familiar with, I've lived in an apartment for quite a few years. For example, at Integra, by the dunes or whatever the name is on Casanova Road, one building, how many people would live in a building? Say 3 or 4, 5 story building?
Yeah, it can depend on, every developer has a slightly different model. The developer of the multifamily that's currently interested in this site and under contract, subject to a lot of conditions down the road, builds 3-story, right? The comp plan change that I'm asking for here would actually allow up to 4 or 5. Why ask for 4 or 5 if we only need 3? We got an auto mall approved, right? We want that flexibility, and you know, there's advantages for accessibility and for fire safety and other things to stay at 3 or below. Construction costs are lower, accessibility is lower, life safety is easier. The only real main advantage of going up higher than that is more units on less dirt, right? Preserve more green space, use up less footprint. So who knows what might change down the road as any change, but it can depend, and that would be one of those conversations down the road. I believe 36 units per building is the max in what we have, so you'd be looking at 12, 13 unit configuration, typically talking about 3 unit.
And what is how many buildings are on Casanova there?
I think there's 280-ish units.
So that's a relative comparison.
It's about the same size. Yeah.
How much of the space, 36 acres, if this was proposed, if it was approved and proposed, with 300 apartments, 152 townhomes, laid out in some fashion, how much of that 36 acres would be left for other commercial development?
It depends a little bit, obviously, on how the site plan gets wiggled around, and the townhomes, right? If they continue to be a part of the plan or not, and how many. That depends on the plan a little bit. So, you know, it really just depends on those.
The drawing makes it look to me like there's no land left for commercial use. Very little. It's mostly all commercial use. Full-up commercial use would be on the land side of the development.
So as of right now, what currently stands under the PD, the development agreement, is that the land side can have the convenience store, the restaurants, the retail, especially retail, the office. And the only thing that is permitted on the Lake Helen side at all is auto sales and related uses. It's the only thing at all. So one of the things you would see, now under the land use, right, it's very, very broad. Workplace, anywhere people work, basically. But the zoning, at a minimum, is going to have to be amended to allow commercial uses other than auto sales down the road, unless it were changed to allow just a couple of surface lots, you know, your typical standard asphalt, you know, C auto dealership. So it has to change anyway, and I think presumably what you do is you allow the same uses that are allowed on the plan side and Lake Helen side, plus the possibility of the residential. So if it can be configured down the road at that PD phase where, well, maybe you can move these buildings around a little bit, maybe you can put more units in a building to create a little more space, you can slide one of those commercial out parcels over into the Lake Helen side so it's got an out parcel. But I would, from an economic standpoint, right, I would rely on your economic advisors to tell you what are you actually getting more tax base out of per acre on that type of commercial out parcel that far away from frontage road and the access versus putting 20 apartment units on it. Because you look at that, what they've estimated in there, the taxable value per unit, I think they use a number of about $175,000 per unit. And that's based on what the tax rules say now about the style of apartments, right? So if you're talking about a 36 unit building, 36 times 175, it's a pretty big number. I mean, even the hot corners of like a front end of an Orange Camp, you know, where you're going to get the maximum amount of dollars per acre, you know, Nathan, it's maybe $1 million to an end user per acre. And it drops dramatically the farther you go away from frontage road. When you take that Orange Camp turn, that first one, that's the highest dollar value. Every foot you've got to drive beyond that, it goes down. That's just the reality of commercial real estate. So if you're talking about getting it all the way back over there, you know, it would have to be a balancing act at that point, I think, to say, well, what are we really better off tax-wise?
So I did not see in what was provided to us traffic impact, and so they based upon just anecdotal information. How would the, let's use the example of the automobile fully built out like it was originally planned, the traffic from that versus traffic count for what's proposed here? Is it all the same, apartments are more or less?
With the apartments and the townhomes combined, I believe the traffic count is less than half compared to the automobile. That's just, engineers that are paid to do nothing but traffic studies. Typically, it's about, I believe, 50,000 square feet of retail equals 500 dwelling units, I want to say, and that could be wrong, but it's, we ran those numbers. That's one of the very first things we did, right? We're not going to waste time going out and getting contracts under property and everything if we know the traffic count's going to go on. It's one of the most basic elemental foundations of looking at whether or not a development's feasible. It's considerably less. Considerably less. And again, that has to come back in front of you before anything ever gets built. You can't, obviously not going to take our word for it. There's rules about that. We got to provide an updated traffic study.
And as proposed right now, the townhomes will be effectively single-family homes and townhomes, but they're single-family homes, owner-occupied or they're not rentals.
Correct. They're not rentals. They would be for sale. Per unit. The comment was you can't stop people from renting them out. That's true. Well, you can. You can. But
the reason why I asked that question is I did not see in the financial, the Saber Homes Amendment, threw in a number. Well, here's how homestead exemption would affect this, but they did not put in the Saber Homes Amendment provision. So owner-occupied townhome is going to, over time, bring us less and less tax revenue, right?
It is not only possible, it's certain and inevitable, and that was reflected in the James Moore study that the city had done too. It took that into account.
Got that a second.
I have a question. I've noticed on the sign, the for sale sign on front of the property, that it says under contract. So obviously there's a developer involved, contingent on whatever happens. What is to stop the developer from going with low-income housing down the road, right away, whatever? What if half of those apartments become federally funded? That's out of the tax base.
Well, I can tell you a couple things, and then I'm sure your city attorney will probably weigh into. One, the developer under contract just doesn't build those. But two, it is really, really illegal to put any kind of a requirement in any zoning or land use that says you can't have low-income housing or can't have affordable housing, can't have tax-subsidized housing. Highly illegal. So to answer your question, never on any project ever is it possible to make sure that will happen.
Correct, but you can't take into consideration then the taxes that will be generated, because if your low-income housing cuts a good chunk out of that tax base, the taxes are only based on the actual.
Well, I would let your economic advisors weigh in on that, but just because there's housing is subsidized doesn't mean it doesn't generate tax revenue and property tax revenue. The ad valorem tax revenue is based on the value of the property, regardless of who lives there or anything else. Property has a certain value and it gets taxed accordingly. So there's going to be tax base there, regardless of what kind of housing it is. But I would let your city consultants, weigh in on that.
So what I hear you saying is that if we allow this density to be approved, we are welcoming an opportunity for low-income housing to be placed there eventually. And I'm not sure, you might know the answer to this question as a developer. When apartments are built, what is their lifespan, generally speaking, as high-end apartments, and then they become low-income housing? What is the stat on that? Do you have a guess?
Well, I'll say
5 years?
2 things first.
Okay.
Are you welcoming low-income housing if you approve this? Any zoning category that allows apartments anywhere in any city, county, or state in the United States of America cannot discriminate against people based on race, income, or religion under the Fair Housing Act. And so any place, including all of your zoning in Lake Helen that already allows for apartments, there is the possibility for it to be fair housing. There is the possibility in the most high-end apartment complex ever built at $4,000 a month, $8,000 a month, $12,000 a month, to require a certain allocation to be dedicated over and set aside. And so you get the very nice building, right? And I think what some cities and counties kind of believe is that by doing that up front, right, it's almost counterintuitive. It's like the grocery store thing that takes strips off the room. I think one of the things that they find is that, well, if we say from the beginning, you gotta have 10, you gotta say, well, there's gonna be 10. That's all there's gonna be, as opposed to this might become a project. Personally, percentages, I have no idea. I've never seen a stat, anything like it. I don't recall, just personally, and maybe I've just been in a bubble somehow, but I cannot think of one at all. I will tell you what I have heard a lot when I talk about this project or others in this area. When I say we're talking about an apartment project and somebody says, well, I don't want to see government housing, I want to see something nice. And I say, well, what would you tell, what looks nice? What looks nice to you? Tell me an example of one around here that you think looks nice. And a lot of people say, well, the one that's right by the Circle K at the corner of Brooklyn and Taylor, that's a nice looking apartment building. Great, that's Section 8 housing.
Sure.
Thank you for making my point. My second question is, as far as the traffic...
I would ask this too, who are you afraid might move in?
I mean, that was just my question. I don't live in apartments, but what
You were basing
Very, very much.
and not discriminating.
excuse me, I was simply trying to get information from you as a developer to see how long these apartment complexes will look nice. It really doesn't matter if they're Section 8 or not, but what I'm saying, but what you just informed us of is that when we change the comp plan, we are then opening a door to that, and I'm not.
A door that's already open in all of your zoning that allows multifamily housing on this side.
But we don't have this density. Okay, so my second question.
And also your land development code applies to this building just like it does any other.
I understand that. My second question is, with your traffic analysis, or you say that this would be a step down in traffic.
Right.
And I believe you when you say that. However, when traffic is coming to commercial places only, even if it's more, it doesn't change the voter rolls. It doesn't change the character of the city. So it doesn't overpopulate our schools, and These people are not here to go to work in the morning from this location, drop their kids off at school, and add to our already traffic problem in Lake Helen. So I think with full disclosure, a commercial developed piece of property rather than high-density residential would be more traffic favorable. And even if there are more cars during the day, they're not dropping their kids off at school, they're not going to the grocery store. So that's just my take. I just thought I'd point that out.
Yeah, and the traffic studies, part of their breakdown is AM peak trips, PM peak trips, afternoon trips. You're 100% correct. There's a different distribution of trips per day. There's a higher peak AM, higher peak PM, because presumably people go to work around 8 or 9 in the morning, come home around 5 p.m. So there is a difference in peak trips. And it's different for different industries, right? So the auto mall has a different peak generation rate than a restaurant or a doctor's office or some other uses too. And so they do break that down in there, and you would see that breakdown. But again, right now, all I can tell you is, the traffic study is required. We usually are the ones that pick the traffic engineer, but anybody can pick it. They all use the same book to come up with calculations. And they'll have to update that, and that's certainly something that down the road would be a consideration no matter what we change, because the change from auto mall to anything is going to require an updated traffic study. Typically what we do in most projects, and most cities do it, most counties do it, is there's a trip equivalency matrix built into it that basically says, here's the number of trips you can have, here's all the different kind of uses that you have allowed in the project. But we don't know, for example, if it's going to be a hotel building, or take the top left corner of the project, it could be currently either hotel or office. Those have different trip rates, right? There may never be a hotel in this distribution.
Still won't change the character of our city.
Right. So in your question, and I think it's probably worth studying, and if it's something that the Planning Commission or ultimately the City Commission wants us to bring back as part of a subsequent hearing, what are the percentages of voter turnout rates in multifamily versus townhome? Because they are different in multifamily, townhome, and single family. They're just statistically, you have a different percentage of turnout. That would be something I'm sure to consider. I would want to consider it if I were a resident of Lake Helen on the Planning Commission or the City Commission. And then the other component of that is, what would that have a practical effect procedurally? Because I believe you all in your city commissions are split up by districts geographically, correct? And then the mayor's citywide. So probably what you end up having is that if you had a maximum build out, which again, probably unlikely with engineering, if you had a maximum build out, you project about 1,000 people. They're not all going to be voting age, number one, right? So let's say you've got 700 voters, you go with the percentages down there. It probably ends up being its own districts in a redistricting. You probably end up having a Westland I-4 voting district as a result of a change like this. So it probably affects one district and the at-large race, and not, well, the other ones would get redrawn based on where they are.
Correct, and typically people who live in apartments and smaller townhomes that are next to apartments, which will devalue the proposed townhomes, are transient type people who don't invest in Lake Helen long term. So these are the many things that we have to consider that have not been brought up at this meeting. So, and I understand that's not what we're voting on tonight.
The one thing I'd say about the voting is we have districts, but everybody runs at large. So you're not voted in by district. You represent a district, you live in a district, it's citywide voting for every district. So it won't be a situation where the area wants to buy for will vote for their own representative. They vote for, everybody votes for everyone, but somehow we just happen to live in that district.
I thought Lake Helen did that.
Yeah.
That people are nominated to live in one district.
Yeah, to live in the district, everybody.
Mr. Dillon, there's a statement in the economic report that says, the estimate, I guess, the population increase would be about nearly 1,000 people, 994 residents if it was fully built out according to the standards that they use. Are you in agreement with that number? If it was built out fully?
Yeah, I mean, they pulled from kind of a standard actuarial type chart, you know, the equivalent of that type of chart to say if you've got 2 bedrooms and 2 baths, how many people live there on average? And I think it's, what, 2.3 people or something like that.
So that's about a 40% increase in our population.
Yeah. It would be, and then, and I don't know what they bring. Now, another thing, and I know the public doesn't always understand this, but, you know, not at this phase, but when you go to the phase of the development agreement, when you're actually going to apply for, okay, well, actually, how many units can get built up to that cap? One of the things we have to do at that point is go to the school district and get certification of capacity. And no project gets approved if there's no certification of capacity without it. That's moving around. That happens on every single project that has residential, unless it's 55 or over.
Would the developer be open to the idea that townhouses must be fee simple, owned by individuals or corporations, not rentals, not a rental? Because that's the new, I guess the new concept is put up 152 townhouses and they're all rentals. You run it like an apartment building, but it's actually rentals.
Yeah, so, you know, the pros and cons, yes, I mean, I think that's certainly something that.
And would that come in the next step?
That would be at the next, step, and similar to, I think already in our kind of draft proposal is that it has to have an owners association. So I think the next step is that has to be one of the covenants in the owners association. And, you know, beyond that, there may be the ability to do a, you know, true deed restriction that can't be amended down the road. Although these days, it's almost impossible to amend homeowner association covenants because nobody ever gets a proxy vote.
Any further questions from the board? Attorney General?
I got to say that if somebody's read this or saw this, this is a development that they approved in Deltona over here on Catalina Drive for rental homes. Everything in there is rental. There's no such thing as buying anything. The outfit's out in Miami. They got approval. I was reading in the paper and stuff. So I'll just put it this way. They're getting closer and closer. That's all.
There actually is a project that's approved on MLK near Casanova Road that is going to be built to rent, and it's a combination of different like quadplexes, duplexes, standalone single-family homes. So it looks like kind of a cottage community, but they are all built to rent. So you get more of a neighborhood feel, less of an apartment feel, but it's a rental.
I'm just saying it's getting closer.
Which, and you know, this is just a general statement. It's just the reality of Volusia County wide, and I think a lot of counties have this problem. We all agree, I think every city agrees, community leaders agree, there is desperately a shortage of rental, but not government housing, right? There's that's a different category. There's a shortage of that too. But there's also a shortage of true market rate housing. The rental rates on single family homes are ridiculous. You see a home that's only worth $110,000 and it's $2,200 a month to rent.
$2,350.
And it's supply and demand, right? If the supply comes up, the price goes down.
And I have one more question.
Yep.
If you're done cooking, sorry.
That's all right.
I have one more question, and we're not at this stage yet. However, I am curious, with all of the land that DeLand has and all of the commercial income that DeLand gets, and Lake Helen not having land to develop commercial and our whole downtown burned years and years ago, the one thing that we were counting on is this commercial area to help relieve some of the tax pressures that we have to impose on our citizens. Why would you not put all of the commercial on Lake Helen's side, just out of respect?
Well, who should pay for it? Because here's the problem. It's not us who decides what the retailers and the restaurants and the gas stations want, or what they'll pay for, or where they'll locate.
See, to us, it just looks like a picture flip.
And the reality is, well, here's the reality.
You want us to change the comp plan like that, but to us, this just looks like a picture flip. So
We cannot change the location of frontage road. Cannot. Impossible. Not our choice. Our choice was to have the main entrance to the property be where existing Stewart Road is. That's what we wanted. That's what we spent 6 months of delay. The project didn't move forward for 6 months. This goes back into 2016 and 2017, fighting and arguing with the DOT. Everybody else was kind of on our side about it. DOT said, absolutely not, never, it's not going to happen. The limited access line is actually just barely east of where it shows frontage road. We can move frontage road over like 17 feet, but it wouldn't do any good. I mean, that wouldn't make a difference. So frontage road, where you see that curve that comes up, and originally what it was intended to do back in 2000 is, and that's owned in fee simple by FDOT, they started acquiring segments of road from Summit all the way down to Saxon. And originally the plan, the county's plan and DOT's plan is this would be an I-4 relief road. It would run from Summit to Saxon. Phase 1 would be Summit to Orange Camp, then Orange Camp to 472, and then eventually 472 to Saxon. Or possibly tie into the Veterans Memorial extension when they got there. So that was the original plan, and this was the first step. They bought it, there was a deal between the Ford family and DOT, and then across the street a deal between the Stewart family. And actually part of the Stewart family's deal, and you'll notice when you drive by there right now, it's actually paved. It's a road to nowhere right now. So on this side, on the south side of the road, you've got a little bit of a road to nowhere because it's part of the taking, the government taking, the eminent domain deal back then when FDOT took this. That wasn't part of the deal on this side, but it was on the south side, is that when they finally widened the road, they would pave out the stuff out of it. So that's why that part of the road is paved. The original plan is for that road to curve and just hug the line, 4-lane, minimum 50-mile-an-hour speed limit road, running right along the border of Victoria Gardens, up and then ultimately connecting to McKenzie and Summit, kind of connect up, make a connection. That was their plan. They spent 10 years and $20 million on it, and then 2 years later they said, never mind. So there's little segments when you go south along between Orange Camp and 472. There's these little segments that FDOT or the county owns that would have accommodated that alignment. But as of right now, it makes really good sense, right? And the things I bet you if we're here 10 years from now talking about some other development in this area, we'll probably be talking about, or will have already happened, when the Beersford extension makes it all the way over to Summit. The true Beersford extension, not the little connection that just got made, but the true Beersford connection. Yeah. That's when it'll really start making sense that this frontage road goes up and connects to all that also. And it's good traffic planning for growth that's inevitable. What we all know is that you can't just not build the roads to stop growth. It's going to happen, right? You have to plan for the roads. And so that was part of the plan. It just got abandoned when the crash happened in 2004, 2005. But we can't change that. To answer your question, if we could, and that goes back to what I mentioned before too, right? This is 50 acres. The overall PUD is 50 acres. It looks small kind of on this map right here, but 50 acres is twice the size of the public center up at Orange Camp and Woodland. Now, it's 25, and then there's an extra 8. The Chick-fil-A side of the street is like an extra 8 with a hotel, the storage facility, Chick-fil-A. There's an extra 8 acres over there, a lot of it's stormwater. But that, from the road where Chick-fil-A is on to Orange Camp, that whole public development is 25 acres.
I don't know if anybody recalls way back when Victoria Park was in bloom, and they came and they called meetings, and they promised the city of Lake Helen that we were going to be able to develop this commercial piece of property that we have sitting out there on I-4, and was going to bring us all kinds of money. And Victoria Park promised us all the stars and the moon and the sun, and it never happened. It didn't happen. And here we are again now, being promised the stars and the moon and the sun. But what's going to happen? What is the impact to our town with 1,000 people coming over I-4? 10, 15% of them, 20% of them, everybody hitting per that so they can go that way. Or everybody trying to get onto I-4. I mean, we have to consider the citizens of this town and what they want. Maybe economically it's not 100% what it should be, but the land development plan and the regulations say that the intention is to preserve the existing quality of life that is afforded to the city of Lake Helen residents and visitors, and to preserve the small town charm, honor, and build upon the city's historical heritage. I'm sorry, I know that Mr. Hurley's invested all kinds of money, it's crazy money, but build a hotel, build a restaurant, build something. Don't bring us 1,000 residents that we don't have the infrastructure to support right now. And you can't tell them stay over there. You can't come over here during the day. You have to have a pass to get over the bridge. You know, really.
Well, I can tell you that, and I get that, I understand that sentiment. I can tell you this, if there was a hotelier willing to build a hotel there right now, it would be built. Because there's an entitlement in that top left corner for a hotel. And it's not built, because there's no road to get there and there's no utilities going there. There's been entitlements since 2000 to build up to 300 hotel rooms in Lake Helen, in the employment center, but it's not built because there's no road, there's no utilities to get there. This is the gateway to your employment center.
Attorney John, let me ask you a question. This area here, that's Victoria Gardens, is this all built out?
Yes.
Yes.
This house is built out?
Yes, right after this.
Yes.
So they have no choice but to use this.
And when they bought their home, there was already the entitlement for an 80-foot tall sea of buildings with 774,000 square feet of commercial use. Right next to it. This is, so from the closest point of the closest house that's shown there, now there's some stuff that's a lot closer to the land edge, it's down by Larkspur. But the closest stuff there is about 700 feet to this project, and about 500 feet to where the extension of frontage road would go if it continued beyond this project. So it's actually closer to the old existing employment center than it is to this. And actually that one section is like 13 homes that were carved out of some of the most densely treed kind of wildlife area.
Before that, any more questions for Attorney General? Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Hurley? We will take comments. I have a list of them here, starting with Todd Preston. Todd, still here? Oh. You have time?
Good evening. I just have a prepared statement here, and I tried to get it down to 3 minutes, but I couldn't do it. It's going to be about 3 minutes and 38 seconds. So if you would kindly afford me that time, I would appreciate it. Thank you. So here we go. Good evening. I'm Todd Preston. I reside at 352 Connecticut Avenue. Lake Helen's comprehensive plan is a constitution-like document that provides a vision and roadmap of where we are as a city, where we're going, and how to get there. The comprehensive plan is solid, but not completely resolute. It has great vision and good ideas, but within it, there's also a conflict. Conflict means that sometimes it's okay to change that plan, to resolve that conflict, or sometimes to maybe adapt to changing times in order to continue on the road to its great destination. Tonight's consideration exposes an identifiable conflict and a proposed resolution that could not only clear that conflict, but that could also benefit the city economically and continue us on the road to our future vision. The comprehensive plan's primary concern is the growth of our city, and in fact, the entire plan focuses on our growth. We want to grow responsibly, but we want to do so within established laws. The laws say we must take into consideration affordable housing, among other things. In doing so, the comp plan identifies multifamily housing as a primary objective in achieving affordable housing. In fact, Chapter 4 housing element specifically states the city will ensure housing opportunities by allowing varied types of housing, including but not limited to single-family and multifamily homes. Well, we already have single-family homes, but are you aware there are no zoning classifications in the comp plan that allow for multifamily housing? Therein lies the conflict. The city has no accommodations for multifamily housing in the comp plan. If the city continues to reserve residential development of single-family homes, they're allowing the window of opportunity to open for the unintended consequence of being in violation of the law and getting sued by someone that will want to force their hand and allow them to build multifamily homes, presumably near the cultural center of the town, where its most prized asset lies, its rural small-town charm. By allowing this proposed amendment, you would be meeting the requirements of a strong mandate of the comp plan by allowing multifamily housing, which is called for in that plan, and which would be at the outskirts of town, far away from the rural hometown center, and would simultaneously head off at the pass any future legal challenges by someone forcing your hand by law. When someone comes before you in the future, and they will, and they say, you have to let me build multifamily homes and I want them here near downtown, you can tell them no. We already have multifamily housing stock in the city, and it's in this section over here. Again, I reiterate, the comprehensive plan has no zoning classifications for multifamily housing. That puts the comp plan in direct conflict with itself, and here before you tonight is an opportunity to permanently rectify that conflict. This project would be an economic boon for the city while maintaining and preserving its core downtown rural residential character and small town charm, and would cement the city's resolve in facing future challenges to it. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. I'll give you a few extra seconds here as a former member of the board. Carrie Marshall. And these names are random.
I'm Kerry Marshall. I live in Victoria Gardens. I'm here to ask the PLDRC to not approve this proposal, and I'm asking you for sending a recommendation forward to your city commission to also not approve it. Why not make a change? Well, it's been stated many times that if you change the plan, that is the first step to changing the zoning. And if you change the zoning, I'm going to offer to you, you're opening the door for high-density residential development. It might be on the other side of the interstate, but it's in your city limits. The high-density development that's proposed for the red area there is going to yield approximately 1,000 people. You're the planning commission. You have to assume that. And I have heard two lawyers, in my words, say there's no way that that green stuff could become residential. And then I heard them say, well, it would be hard, these are my words, to become residential. And then I heard them say, well, but you just have to get everybody to sign off on it. You need to plan for the fact that that could possibly become high-density residential development in your city limits. If you've got 1,000 people there, and for just round numbers, you get the same kind of plan up in the green, you could wind up with 2,000 or 3,000 new cities in the city of Lake Helen, the gem of Florida. They don't care about you have a bond issue that you're looking at, you got some freshwater delivery problems, you got storm management problems, you got wastewater problems. If I lived in either of those places, first of all, in the red, I got a pool that on a map looks like it's about as big as half of an apartment. I got no park, I got nothing. I want you people to vote a bond and pay for that. If I live up in the green section, I got one problem. I'm sick and tired of listening to that interstate. I want you to float a bond, and I want a 12-foot tall concrete barrier with steel girders that protect me from the sound of that interstate. And I'm your citizen, and I demand that you do that. And since you guys were all elected across the city, we might just vote you folks out of office and your city commissioners too, and we'll get somebody in there that will give us what we want. You need to plan for the long term, and I'm sorry to say this, but you need to plan for scenarios that might not be what you want. It costs you nothing to make no change. It costs you nothing to not approve this plan that's been brought before you and not change the comprehensive plan and not recommend zoning and high density development. It costs you nothing to do that. It costs the city of Lake Helen nothing to do that. What happens when you get 3,000 people up there? You lose control of your finances, you lose control of your strategic planning, you lose control possibly of everything. The developer has not brought you what you've been looking for. Well, I offer to you, changing the zoning and changing the plan isn't going to solve that. Maybe you need a different developer. The developer has the right to sell his land and get what he can for it. And that will send a message to the community that maybe a developer ought to come and build what you want. Please don't change the plan. Stay the course. It costs you nothing to stay where you are.